Hello, Dave here. We've got a bonus episode of In the City for you this week. It's hosted by Bloomberg radio host Stephen Carroll, but he kindly stepped in for me and Francine to record an episode of In the City and an event this week in London. The event was the Grow Summit. It's a very interesting conversation with two outstanding guests. I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to In the City, Bloomberg's podcast connecting you to the conversations and the stories shaping the world of finance. I'm Stephen Carroll. This week we are recording in front of an audience at the Grow Summit at Battersea Power Station. This is an event for scale-up companies, so the conversation we're having is about building and growing a business in the UK in 2023, with the background of the gloomy economic environment, the gloomy business confidence that has been measured in recent surveys, and of course the ever-present impact of higher interest rates and how that affects the cost of borrowing as well. Joining me to discuss, Martha Lane-Fox, President of the British Chambers of Commerce, Chair at WeTransfer, among many other roles that you hold, and Pete Flint, who is General Partner at NFX, a venture firm based in San Francisco, founder too of the US property website Trulia. Thank you to you both for being with us. Looking forward to getting into this conversation. You've both had long and illustrious careers in business. You've done many jobs in many different things. You've built incredible businesses over your careers as well, but you're also former colleagues, because you worked together in the early days of LastMinutecom as well. So we never say, in the city, bringing old friends back together as well. So we're very glad to have you both. Martha, I actually want to start with a question about LastMinutecom and whether you think, that was a business built in the late 90s here in the UK. Do you think it'd be easier or harder to create a LastMinute.com similar business now compared to then?
I think it would be easier. I think it would be easier for multiple reasons. I mean, the only thing I might caveat with is that Pete might not be part of it. And without that, I'm not sure it would have been a success, because
it's all gone wrong.
Brent and I were like there being the co-founders, but Pete, as you will quickly see when he's talking, is the fundamental building block of any successful business. So that's the only caveat. But I think it'll be easier for many reasons. More access to capital. Everyone said no to our original business plan. And despite the kind of starry story of the trajectory we went on, it was hard to raise money, and the public journey that we went on was when we really got cash into the business. So that's one thing. Secondly, the technology is much better. I remember sitting watching the website. I'm sure Pete remembers endlessly the loading speeds. We're obsessed with loading speeds. The idea that you could actually buy something on the site is a joke. It was me with a fax machine writing down people's credit card numbers. Don't tell anyone. And so, those things are easier. So and the whole ecosystem, obviously the competition is different, but I still think that there is an opportunity actually to build a strong LastMinute.com. It exists now, but I think it could be even powered up more. So I think it would be easier.
I think there are 23 parallels to the idea of taking something off the internet and putting it in a fax machine. I'm sure lots of people in this room identify with the bootstrapping of early parts of businesses building that as well. I wonder how your view is. You work in Silicon Valley now. You spent a lot of your career in the US. How do you view the UK as a place to build a business now?
Well, reminiscing, I fondly remember I was sitting next to the fax machine, so I was like, when it had to go through again, I was doing that work as well. But so I moved to the US in 2003, so we were together 20 years ago.
As children.
As children, literally. And I think I was probably frustrated at the time, because it's like, to scale Last Minute, we had offices in France, in Germany, in Italy, in Sweden, in Spain, Australia, like all these different places, and you had to deal with local offices, local distribution, local marketing. And I moved to Silicon Valley originally for grad school, but it was sort of remarkable how you could spread across the US. Really, with half a dozen people, we were live in the US. And I think today, travel somewhat regulated, but let's assume kind of most businesses are sort of less regulated. You can actually build global businesses out of the UK. There is Google, there is Facebook, there is Instagram, there is app stores. There's marketing services. You can translate stuff in 100 different languages very quickly. So I think it is so much easier to scale sort of internationally to do those things. And so my frustrations back in 2003 of was this so hard to deal with French employment law and kind of all these different things and French marketing is now it's actually much easier to scale this stuff globally in terms of building this business, which is, we're seeing it in the portfolio. We're seeing the companies that they're starting to spread incredibly quickly across many different countries. And actually, when it comes to London, I think that's a very unique place that London has, potential to be a global technology hub. more so than I think many other places globally.
And is that, in your view, because a lot of conversations being had, of course, post-Brexit about how Britain competes with other European cities. That competition, of course, has been there for a very long time when it comes to attracting businesses like the people in this room who are building them as well. Is English what helps there? What do you see as being the aspect that allows?
It certainly helps, but I don't think it's zero-sum. I really don't think it's zero-sum. There's so many entrepreneurs. There's not enough capital, and there probably should be more entrepreneurs, but I think it's not zero-sum. So I think the opportunity is not to compete against Europe, but to actually, and successful companies going to offices in continental Europe, they're going to have offices in the UK, and probably have offices in the US. But I think what sets, the UK apart is obviously there's a concentration of capital that's happening. You're seeing the sort of the offices opening up in a lot of US firms. The sort of venture capital environment is transformed in the last 25 years. I think LastMinute raised capital by chance, and you stand next to someone on a plane and sort of
sent a business plan to the wrong address, and it just so happened that there was a VC in the address and opened the
It's sort of like circumstance and happens.
So raise your hand if that has happened to you. Okay, no hands, fine.
Never give up.
But it's an interesting conversation about funding as well, because there is this conversation you do hear from people who don't have that access to capital. Yeah. How do you see that environment now with all of your hats on of the various jobs that you do
I feel as though, I'm an inherent optimist. I think you have to be as an entrepreneur, and having, had the experiences I've had over the last 20 years, but this country is really bifurcated, right? And it's super important, I think, that we keep having that conversation. There are a huge number of things that are much, much better. And to Pete's point, London, you're being a bit shy about London. When we were talking earlier, you actually said you thought London was second in the world to Silicon Valley. So I'm going to big that up a bit more. So I hope that's okay. Attribution to Pete. So I think that's phenomenal, right? But we know that there is still challenges outside the golden triangle of places. We know that the access to capital is not equally spread amongst genders, about socioeconomic groups, about ethnic groups, so forth, that is well described often. So there's a lot to do. It is better. But I think the real opportunity that we can go for in the next decade is to think about London not, and I know that Saul talks about this too, not as Silicon Valley, but to be a truly diverse and really representative place that is building scale businesses, but they're not shooting just for this unicorn. Sorry, you're on the podcast.
That's quite all right.
I totally forgot.
It's fine.
I totally forgot. Unicorn or decacorn or whatever the hell status it is, but actually to think about a different way of spreading prosperity and wealth and values.
And is that also across sectors? Because it does feel like, if you listen to the people who run this country, that there's such a focus on particular areas, on tech, on AI most recently as well. Is there scope for a broad base of those companies to be built?
100%. I defer to Pete too, but I'd just make one point before I do, which is, I was part of setting up government digital service in gov.uk, and there is just so much we can do enabling government to be more active in engaging with startups, but opening up the public sector. Every single one of those brilliant lightning pitches earlier needs government actually in this country, not everywhere, to help them really scale. And so in my opinion, that's another place that the UK could really lead, and London could lead specifically in terms of really making sure that we are ensuring the procurement process is open to startups in a way that it is just not at the minute. Ensuring that our ministers are able to talk about AI competently. We're not just interviewing Elon Musk on stage. So all those things are really careful, active policies that we can make and change. So I think there's a huge opportunity. We're not done yet. It's much better than it was, but there's a way to go.
Does that mean a different government would help?
I don't know.
Okay.
But I think the UK has had, it's changed a lot in the last 20 years, but the last 5 years has been particularly beneficial. We think of what are the hottest sectors in tech, and it's debatable who you speak to, but clearly Fintech, clearly AI, clearly the intersection between computation and biology. All those areas are incredibly strong. And I think, the UK Fintech environment is incredibly strong. AI, clearly the sort of like academic meets deep mind, is sort of long history of success. And then the bio stuff is very interesting. So I think there's, this stuff doesn't happen overnight, but there's momentum in the market. The other piece I want to touch on, just that, you spend a lot of time in Silicon Valley, is that that Silicon Valley is not the success of Silicon Valley is not because people were born in, Idaho and then moved to Silicon Valley. They weren't, moved from Palo Alto to San Francisco. It's the story of immigrants. It's absolutely the story of immigrants. I think that, 50% of the unicorns, to choose that, definition, is have a founder who is a first generation immigrant, something like 2/3 a second generation immigrant. And we all know the stories behind the successful immigrant founders. And the immigrants really do create the startups. And I think that there are...
Why is that, do you think?
Bunch of different reasons. One is that they look at problems differently. If you grew up I sort of moved to the US and said, it sucks to buy a house there. And if I complained about that to my parents who lived there, they're, oh, this is the way it's always done, don't worry about it. But I was like, this makes no sense. So fresh ideas, naivety is absolutely a sort of key ingredient. Two, I think the work ethic is just immigrant work ethic. There's no plan B. You kind of like, I think, my mother was a high school teacher in London. It's like, and the immigrants worked a hell of a lot harder than the non-immigrants. They were just like, they had that power, that will to succeed. And they work, they work incredibly hard, and they don't really have a sort of plan B. So I think that combination is incredibly powerful. And I think do you think the UK doesn't have that? No, I think it has it in spades. I think it's like I mean, look, it's everyone has a different opinion, but I think it's like, I think the potential for immigration, and Brexit is obviously a sort of a negativity to it, but I think it's, compared to many other places in the world, it is a great environment for immigrants to come, and the government's doing their bit to help the visa process.
Not enough. I mean, I think the elephant in the room when I meet businesses that are not to do with the digital sector, and I'm travelling about as president of the British Chambers of Commerce, which I was in Stoke yesterday, I was in Doncaster a couple of weeks ago. The single biggest issue that companies that I meet there around about the place face is people and skills, and they point directly to issues related to Brexit, and specifically that the short-term visas and contracts, that list that the government opened up is not long enough, doesn't encompass all the things that they need. So I don't think we have that conversation enough in the open. I don't think politicians are brave enough about it. Brexit affected the skills base, full stop, in my opinion. And I think we need to be able to address that head on before we really can power up more.
What specifically in terms of professions or skill sets need to be on that list? Well, what's missing?
More, across the board. I don't think I could even, it's well known about hospitality through to manufacturing, engineering, software, whatever, but it's across the board. I haven't met a business that said to me, oh yeah, I'm fine. I can route whoever I want. I can retrain whoever I want. I can retain whoever I want. It isn't like that, I think, in the economy right now.
Okay. And that's a very interesting point. I mean, the question that got a lot of focus recently, and this is, kind of moving upwards on the scale when we're scaling up, is listings in London and the lack of listings in London, and how that's become sort of a reputational issue. Recently, Julia Hoggett, the CEO of the London Stock Exchange, spoke to the In the City podcast saying that she wants the London market to be young, hungry and scrappy. Is that something that do you think that's achievable for a market in London to be able to attract that?
I mean, look,
I'm
British, so I'm rooting for the kind of more British listings, but I would absolutely not advise any company that I'm backing to go public in the UK. Go and do it in the US. It's like, particularly technology companies, I don't think the investor base really understands it. And I think they will encourage a British listed company to sort of act more like the other stuff in the FTSE, which are, very traditional, whether it's pharmaceutical, whether it's oil and gas or, manufacturing. I just think go to the US. Like, the investors understand it. There's, orders of magnitude more capital. Can they do something about it? Sure. I don't know what they can do about it, but, I think it's really, really hard. I didn't follow the...
Has that changed over time? Because I feel like there's a lot of focus recently on the lack of listings. Was it very different 10 years ago than it is now? Has the US sucked up all of that potential for fundraising when it comes to public listings?
I think so. It feels like it. I mean, the Deliveroo IPO was that 2 years ago. I didn't track it closely, but I think that was a bit of a disaster at the time. And so I just think, if you're an entrepreneur and you want to build a global business, you go where the capital is. The investors understand it, the public markets. And I think it's not, and I don't think it sort of should be seen necessarily as a negativity, like you're rejecting your kind of home country. It's sort of quite the opposite. Like, okay, I'm going to maximize success of the company, make it into a global success story. The benefits will come back to the ecosystem. And, it's possible that London will improve, but it's for the next couple of years. I think it's going to be very challenging.
Is listings the right thing to be looking at in this conversation, or is it a bit of a red herring?
I don't know, but I do think that we push for all the reasons Pete knows better than me about the tension around your venture capital funds. The funds you're then responsible for. We push companies to go public. I'm not sure that we do it in the right timeframes very often. A bit longer for companies to scale and to get bigger and so on is never a bad thing in my opinion. So I think, of course, it's a lens, but and the work that Janet and Sherry have done for decades around helping companies scale is as fundamental and important, and we can achieve, I think, as much without such a laser focus. So all things have to happen at the same time, but we shouldn't push companies who aren't ready to go public.
One of the things that happened over the summer is that the Chancellor announced what was known as the Mansion House Compact, this idea of trying to get the big pension funds to invest more in unlisted companies. It hasn't made much progress so far. Are you optimistic that would help?
It's complicated, isn't it? I think, standing back out from it, should pension funds use their capital more effectively in this country? Yes, right? And the mechanisms to do that, there are hundreds of different ways that I know both this Treasury right now are looking at that, and I know the opposition are looking at it as well. So I do think it's good focus. I think there's lots that can be unlocked. I think you have to be careful what the mechanisms are to do that and what the incentive structures are that you create for the pension funds, and also obviously for where that money goes.
Yeah. Pete, I hear from you that, going to the US is necessary at a certain level, right? If you want to list publicly. Do companies growing in Britain need to be looking at the US? At what point does that become important for when they're looking for capital and getting to a stage of expansion? Is it necessary, first of all?
Well, I think it's, I don't think it's necessary. I think it's, look, I guess one of the benefits that I really got from moving to Silicon Valley was one is just understanding what world-class looks like. And if you want to build a truly world-class company, you need to surround yourself by world-class executives, world-class investors, world-class advisors. And so you can do that in different ways, but just to embed yourself in the ecosystem is very helpful. And, I think America's far from perfect, but they do business in many respects incredibly well. And so if you want to build a world-class company, you need to understand how to run a world-class company. And you can do that by going to Silicon Valley or going to New York and surround yourself, or you can do that by consuming a gazillion YouTube videos and understanding and learn all this stuff. But I think if you're trying to build a world-class company, you need to understand what that takes. And then two is you need to give yourself the resources, both internal and external, to build a world-class company. And so that's the ambition, that's the culture, that's the drive.
Are businesses in this country not being ambitious enough?
No, 100% no. But I might frame it differently to Pete. I think I would frame it that it is about scale, of course, because scale creates the growth and so on, but it's also about the values and the wider impact that you're having in society. And I think that we have an opportunity here to, I've said it before, but not be Silicon Valley and not embed that just growth at all costs, which I know is slightly not the way that it's framed now in Silicon Valley, but is still a fundamental building block of how they think about just building. And actually thinking about consequence, thinking about planetary consequence, human consequence, diversity consequence, and so on. So I don't think we are ambitious enough. There are, of course, pockets of ambition, but I think inherently we are an island and we have a slight island mentality. And I think we can do a lot more in terms of building ambition around a set of values, not just a set of metrics.
How can scale-up companies advocate best for themselves when it comes to the government, people in power who make these decisions? Is it a question that you kind of go by sector? There's big discussions being had in this country about representation of business groups. Should all businesses be joining together? Are they most effective when you work with a broader voice to kind of bring that power to it? What's the best way for companies to advocate for themselves to make the changes that you're talking about?
I mean, it's the same point that Pete made about the US being networks. I mean, you're all here in a network. It's a powerful one that it's unrecognizable to 10, 15 years ago, the networks that exist. So embrace them and be part of them. I am president of a network of businesses, some digital businesses, but 100,000 that probably aren't so much digital across the country. there are so many ways to engage, and you absolutely should. We're coming up to an election, so you will never find an unfriendly politician if you run a business. They love you right now. It used to be that I'd see people when I was wobbling through the Lords, and they might go away from it. They might think, well, she's going to come and badger me about not having enough people on the internet. Now they're like, Martha, hi, how's it going with all your members? So it's a really good moment. And I think it's very important as a leader, as a scale-up company, as an entrepreneur, to be engaged in these discussions and to be fighting for the things that you think you need around you.
Is there a kind of a single unified message that needs to get through? Is there kind of one thing that would really, I mean, you obviously represent plenty of businesses as well, but is there one kind of key message you want the people in this room to be?
No, I mean, I think the key message is actually laddered up. It's a bit more meta. I think the key message, and I think this is why it's important, is because you want to bring people who are not just the entrepreneurs with you in the country. So it's a message of support. We will not do what we want to do in this country without growth. Full stop, right? We won't have the public services. We won't be able to have the kind of society that I think we probably all aspire sort of, collectively to live in if we don't have growth. And that will come from business. That's it, right? It's not very complicated. I'm not an economist, but that's it. So we need businesses to grow. And right now it's patchy in this country. So we need to be robust about what will take our economy forwards. And we need to continually talk about how to get growth at an individual level and at a collective level. And it's brilliant to see politicians of all shade saying the word growth, but we need them to follow through with what that actually means in terms of policy action.
One of the recent efforts from this government focusing on growth was the AI Summit. We talked about a little bit earlier as well. Did that, looking at that event, given your expertise and knowledge of the industry, did that look like a good stab at that, a good stab at making, putting the UK at the centre of that conversation?
I mean, look, my initial reaction is like, okay, it's good that it's a topic of conversation. I also felt that why is it called the AI Safety Summit, not the AI Opportunity Summit? And it's not to be sort of,
There's a murmur of appreciation from the room for that, by the way. My phone didn't pick it up.
I mean, it's good that there is a view in terms of the harm that it can do as well as the benefit. But I just felt the tone of it, at least the outside in, I wasn't there, but this is we need to just be mindful about this. And so I think it's, because the opportunity is enormous, and I'm an optimist as well, and investing in optimists, but it's, I think it, as I think other observers have said, there's a lot of politics around it. And I just think that we should be focused on the opportunities, not the negatives around it. But if there's clearly an opportunity for the UK to be a global force. There's a bunch of British entrepreneurs doing amazing things in AI. So I think,
but they're all doing it in the US.
Well, not exclusively.
Not exclusively,
but I think if you're an ambitious entrepreneur, I think you kind of have to be thinking about the US thinking about the US for this stuff. I'm just worried that it will sort of, the focus of government on it this early on, it feels premature. In terms of just the, having to...
Not just getting ahead of the conversation and, kind of getting in there first and starting it?
Well, I think the opportunity around this is enormous. Sure, it can be dangerous and there's dangers around it, but I don't think that's a function of AI. I think that's a function of other, whether it's individuals or whether it's privacy, security things. There's nothing to do with AI. And I think the danger is you put too much baggage on this airplane and not enable it to take off in its meaningful way. And regulation is a spectrum. You can be highly, or you can be hands off. And I think the talent, capital, and companies are quite fluid because it's global industry, and they will move to the least restrictive environments. And if UK is over-regulating this, then I think it could be people just opt out and just say,
I mean, it's very, they're not alone either. I mean, the EU is obviously working on its own AI Act as well. And there is, the Brussels concept of regulation that comes from the EU becoming a global standard in a lot of areas as well. Is regulation an issue in perhaps not specifically this area, but is the UK doing well when it comes to the regulation that helps to foster business?
I think that we have become somewhat mired in regulation that is not altogether helpful. And we could I'm pro-regulation. I like government. I think government by and large does helpful things, not always individual politicians, but a fully paid up member of believing in governments, right? And I think that if you look at a landscape of business regulation, you see copycats of things, you see regulations that overlaps, you have existing laws that could be well applied to things that you would not need to create new laws for, right? So I was quite struck by Kamala Harris. I was lucky enough to be in the room when she was making her speech, and she was very much reinforcing two things. She was saying this focus right now should be on public sector use of AI, which I agree with. I think the public sector technologies are the huge opportunity, as we just discussed. And I think she was also trying to reinforce we have a lot of existing laws that we don't use effectively to govern with technology. We don't necessarily need to wrap ourselves in anxiety about what the future of regulation looks like. So I think we have a mixed business regulation landscape. We can pare it back, make it simpler. If we think about the online harm bills, for example, started 5-6 years ago in one place, ended up in a completely different place, mammoth, complex, probably will do some good, might do some harm. But if it had been a simpler, quicker, more iterative piece of regulation, I think it might have been more effective.
It's moving so fast. Like ChatGPT is less than a year old. Than a year old. Mm-hmm. And you've got all these politicians and governments are crowding into this. Like, you have no idea what regulations can be helpful for this industry or not.
That's true.
And so I think I'm a strong believer in free markets, but we understand that in free markets, there are sometimes bad actors. And so it's important to be sort of on top of it, engaged, but actually just let's try to be hands off on it, and let's try to foster innovation first and just keep an eye on it rather than the sort of heavy-handed political approach that I'm worried that might happen.
We're coming towards the end. I'm going to ask you for something to be optimistic about in a moment, but I wanted to put a counterfactual to you, is what I'm calling my sliding doors moment. You went away at a point quite early on in your career to move on to the US, and you've stayed there. If you'd stayed in the UK, where do you think you'd be now?
I have no idea. I've not thought about it too much. I don't know. I was just in my career, I was incredibly fortunate to be sort of early on and being mentored by Martha in my early years. And so that experience sort of no doubt would not leave technology and that. So I probably started a business in the UK. That would have been.
Martha, if you'd gone away?
I've definitely left. I really thought I wanted to go to university in the US. So I'd have probably gone to the US, and then I have absolutely no idea. I always wanted to work in the prison service. So plenty of opportunities there. So I might be a prison warder. Who knows?
Right. I'd watch that series. Let's end with a dose of optimism for everyone about, you're speaking to an audience of scale-up companies. What's the one thing you'd be optimistic about if you're growing a business in the UK today?
I think the talent is night and day from when it was 5 years ago. And I think it's people say, okay, you want to build a company, there's 100 VP of sales in Silicon Valley. You only need one VP of sales, and there's enough talent in the UK to build interesting businesses today.
Martha?
I mean, I would say there are lots of things to improve. And I think that's always an opportunity when you're an entrepreneur or you're starting a company, right? We have lots of challenges that I think there are so many moments we can create incredible businesses around. And I see that happening to a degree, but I just hope people have confidence to be ambitious and raise the money, have diverse founding teams, and do a spectacular job of creating a different environment in the UK.
Martha Lane Fox, President of the British Chambers of Commerce, Pete Flint, General Partner at NFX. Thank you to you both for speaking to us at the In the City podcast at the Grow Summit at Battersea Power Station.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this bonus episode of In the City, which was taped at Grow London, a new annual meetup bringing together UK scale-ups. The show will be back next week with the regular host lineup. Don't forget to head over to wherever you listen to podcasts and rate, review and subscribe. And if you're already in your podcast apps, search for Bloomberg UK Politics, the daily politics show that I co-host, and subscribe to us as well. This episode was hosted by me, Stephen Carroll. It was produced by Summer Sadi with help from Tua Adebayo. Additional editing by Blake Maples. Special thanks to the London Partners team and the Grow Summit event. And of course, Martha Lane Fox and Pete Flint.